The courtroom fell into a deathly silence. It was the kind of silence that hangs heavy in the air right before everything explodes. On the witness stand sat Officer Grant Whitaker, a man with a badge pinned to his chest and a smirk he could not quite wipe from his face. He thought he had this locked down. Just another conviction, another statistic. He looked at the defendant, a man in a sharp navy suit named Quentin Vale, and saw nothing but easy prey. But Whitaker did not know the truth. He did not know that the man he had tried to frame with planted drugs was not just some driver. He was the United States Assistant Attorney for the Southern District, a federal prosecutor who had dismantled cartels. And today, he was hunting a different kind of monster. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The air in courtroom 4B felt stale, thick with the scent of floor wax and anxious sweat. It was the smell of desperate people hoping for mercy from a system designed to grind them into dust. Judge Eleanor Hargrove sat behind the mahogany bench, her face a mask of bored patience. She had seen it all, or at least she thought she had. She adjusted her spectacles and glanced down at the docket. State versus Vale, possession with intent to distribute, resisting arrest, assault on a police officer. The charges were heavy, the kind that ruined lives, the kind that ended careers before they began. At the prosecutor's table sat Assistant District Attorney Spencer Hale. Hale was young, hungry, and entirely too confident. He was tapping his pen against a yellow legal pad, already mentally tallying this as a win. Why would he not? He had the testimony of a decorated veteran officer, the physical evidence, and the arrest report. It was a slam dunk. On the defense side sat Quentin Vale. Vale did not look like a man facing a long stretch in a maximum security prison. He sat perfectly still, his posture erect, his hands folded calmly on the table in front of him. He wore a bespoke navy suit that fit his broad shoulders like armor. His tie was a deep crimson tied in a perfect Windsor knot. He did not have a lawyer. "Mr. Vale," Judge Hargrove said, her voice echoing slightly in the wood-paneled room, "I see you are representing yourself today. I must remind you again, as I did at the arraignment, that this is highly inadvisable given the severity of the charges against you. The court can appoint a public defender if—" "Thank you, Your Honor," Vale cut in, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "But I am quite comfortable proceeding on my own behalf." Hale suppressed a scoff. Another jailhouse lawyer, he thought. Thinks he knows the law because he watched a few episodes of a television show. "Very well," Judge Hargrove sighed, rubbing her temples. "Opening statements, Mr. Hale." Hale stood up, buttoning his jacket. He strode to the center of the room, making eye contact with the jury. He knew how to play them. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hale began, his voice dropping to a somber, serious tone. "We trust our law enforcement officers to keep our streets safe. They put their lives on the line every single day." On that night, Officer Grant Whitaker stopped the defendant for a broken taillight. Simple. Routine. But what he found was not simple. A bag of methamphetamine under the driver's seat. And when Officer Whitaker attempted to do his duty, the defendant fought back. He attacked an officer of the law. Today, the evidence will show that Quentin Vale is not a victim. He is a criminal who got caught. Hale walked back to his table, shooting a smug look at Vale. Vale stood up. He did not rush. He buttoned his suit jacket slowly, walked to the center of the room, and looked at the jury. He did not smile. He did not frown. He looked at them with an intensity that made the foreman, an older man in a flannel shirt, shift uncomfortably in his seat. "The state claims I am a criminal," Vale said, his voice calm, terrifyingly controlled. "They claim I possess drugs. They claim I assaulted an officer. But claims require proof, and proof requires truth. Today, you are going to hear a story. It is a story you have heard before. A traffic stop, a search, a bag of drugs. But the ending of this story is different, because in this story, the man in the car saw everything. And by the time we are done, you will realize that the only crime committed that night was committed by the man wearing the badge. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto Officer Grant Whitaker, who was sitting in the front row of the gallery, chewing gum. Vale's gaze was cold, surgical. It was the look of a man who already knew the outcome of the game. Whitaker stopped chewing for a second, a flicker of unease passing through him before he forced a smirk and leaned back. He had no idea who he was looking at. "The prosecution calls Officer Grant Whitaker to the stand," Hale announced. Whitaker stood up, smoothing out his uniform. He was a big man, bulky, with muscle that was slowly turning to fat. He had a buzz cut and eyes that looked like two chips of flint. He walked to the stand with a swagger, the jingle of his utility belt announcing his presence. He took the oath, swearing to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Vale watched him. He watched the way Whitaker's eyes darted to the jury, seeking approval. He watched the way his hand rested on his thigh near his gun. He was analyzing him, breaking him down, cataloging every tick and micro-expression. "Officer Whitaker," Hale started, leaning against the podium, "walk us through that night." Whitaker cleared his throat, leaning into the microphone. "Yes, sir, I was on patrol in the district. I observed a black sedan with a non-functioning taillight. I initiated a traffic stop. And what happened next? The driver, the defendant over there, was agitated immediately," Whitaker said, pointing a thick finger at Vale. "He refused to roll down his window more than an inch. I asked for license and registration. He was arguing, being non-compliant. I smelled a strong chemical odor coming from the vehicle." "A chemical odor?" Hale asked, feigning surprise. "Like what?" "Like meth, sir. I have been on the force for many years. I know the smell." Vale scribbled something on his legal pad. "Strike one." "I asked the driver to step out of the vehicle," Whitaker continued, warming up to his lie. "He refused. He started reaching under his seat. I feared for my safety. I thought he was reaching for a weapon, so I opened the door and extracted him from the vehicle. That is when he swung at me." "He hit you?" "Yes, sir, glancing blow to the shoulder. I had to subdue him. Once he was cuffed, I searched the immediate area where he was reaching. That is when I found it, a baggie containing methamphetamine." The jury gasped softly. That was not recreational. That was dealing. Hale nodded solemnly. "Thank you, officer. No further questions." Judge Hargrove looked at Vale. "Mr. Vale, your witness." The courtroom went quiet. This was usually the part where the defendant stuttered, got angry, or asked irrelevant questions. Whitaker looked bored, ready to deflect whatever amateur questions this guy had. Vale stood up. He did not take any notes with him to the podium. He did not need them. "Officer Whitaker," Vale said, his voice pleasant, almost friendly. "You stated you have been on the force for many years. You are a veteran." "That is right," Whitaker grunted. "You know the law inside and out. You know procedure." "I do." "Good," Vale said. He walked around the table, moving closer to the witness stand. "You stated that I was agitated immediately, that I refused to roll down my window." "That is correct." "And that you smelled a chemical odor." "Yes." "Officer Whitaker, was your body camera active during this stop?" Whitaker hesitated just for a fraction of a second. "It was malfunctioning. Tech issues. It happens. I noted it in my report." "Ah, yes, technical issues," Vale said, nodding slowly. "Convenient. And your dash cam?" "The angle was bad. The vehicle was parked too close to the curb. It did not catch the interior." "So we have no video evidence of the smell or the reaching or the assault. We only have your word." "My word is good enough for the citizens of this county," Whitaker snapped, his face reddening slightly. "I am sure it is," Vale said. "Let us talk about the reaching under the seat. You said I was reaching for a weapon. It looked like it. So you pulled me out violently. I used necessary force to neutralize a threat." "Officer Whitaker," Vale said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming harder. "When you pulled me out of the car, did you see a weapon?" "No, I found drugs." "Right, the drugs." Vale walked back to his table and picked up a piece of paper. "I have here the evidence log. It says the drugs were found wedged under the driver's seat rail. Is that correct?" "Yes, officer." "Do you know what kind of car I drive?" Whitaker blinked. "A sedan, a Mercedes, I think." "A 2024 Mercedes-Benz S-Class," Vale corrected. "Are you aware of the seat configuration of that specific model?" "I do not sell cars, pal. I just stop them." "Objection." Hale stood up. "Relevance." "I will make it relevant, Your Honor," Vale said without looking away from Whitaker. "Overruled. Continue," Judge Hargrove said, leaning forward. She sensed something. The rhythm of the cross-examination was too precise. "The 2024 S-Class," Vale continued, has a sealed underseat compartment for the electronics that control the massage and heating functions. There is no space under the rail to wedge a bag of that size, unless, of course, you rip the paneling off. Whitaker shifted in his seat. Maybe it was next to the rail. I do not remember the exact inch. But you remember the smell? You remember the aggression? Your memory seems selective, officer. I found the drugs, Whitaker shouted, losing his cool. You are a dealer. Stop trying to twist words. Vale smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf that had just tasted blood. I am not twisting words, Officer Whitaker. I am just setting the scene. Vale paused, looking at the jury, then back at Whitaker. You said my window was up, that I would not roll it down. That is right. Then how did you smell the chemical odor before the door was opened? Silence. Whitaker's mouth opened, then closed. The vents. Through the vents, Vale repeated, incredulous. You smelled meth through the vents of a sealed luxury vehicle with a HEPA air filtration system while standing outside on a windy highway. It was a strong smell. It must have been, Vale said. Tell me, Officer Whitaker, have you ever heard of the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine? I am not a lawyer. No, you are not. But you should be aware that if the reason for the search, the smell, is a lie, then the search is illegal, and the evidence is inadmissible. It was not a lie. Vale turned his back on Whitaker. Your Honor, at this time, I would like to introduce Defense Exhibit A. Hale stood up. Objection. The defense has not shared any exhibits during discovery. On the contrary, Vale said, picking up a small flash drive from his table. This evidence was submitted to the district attorney's office recently. Perhaps Mr. Hale did not check his inbox. He turned to Hale. File name, Whitaker-backup. Hale went pale. He started rifling through his files. What is this evidence, Mr. Vale? Judge Hargrove asked. Officer Whitaker claimed his body camera malfunctioned, Vale said, holding the drive up like a holy relic. And he claimed his dashcam had a bad angle. But Officer Whitaker made a mistake. He forgot that modern police cruisers, specifically the models used by this precinct, have a secondary backup recording system that activates when the light bar is turned on. It uploads directly to the cloud, bypassing the local storage on the unit. It is a failsafe for when officers lose footage. Whitaker gripped the railing of the witness stand. His knuckles were white. And, Vale continued, I happen to have subpoena power that allowed me to access the cloud server of the precinct's third-party vendor. Would you like to see what really happened that night? The courtroom erupted. Judge Hargrove banged her gavel. Order! Order in this court! She looked at Vale with wide eyes. Play the tape. And Dean Sawyers. The courtroom lights were dimmed. The silence was heavy, suffocating. All eyes were glued to the large projection screen that had been rolled into the center of the well. Technical difficulties usually plagued courtroom presentations. Bad audio, fuzzy pictures, incompatible files. But Vale had come prepared. The video feed from the backup cloud server was crisp, high definition, and damning. On the screen, the footage showed the rear of a sleek, black Mercedes S-Class. The brake lights were on, casting a red glow on the wet asphalt. Officer Whitaker walked into the frame. The audio crackled to life. License and registration. Whitaker's voice barked. It sounded aggressive, impatient. In the video, the window of the Mercedes slid down, not an inch, as Whitaker had testified, but fully. Good evening, officer, came Quentin Vale's voice. It was calm, polite. Is there a problem? I believe I was traveling within the speed limit. Tail light out, Whitaker snapped. You deaf? I asked for license and registration. I am reaching into my jacket pocket for my wallet. Vale narrated his movements, a standard procedure for law enforcement officers when stopped to signal non-aggression. On the witness stand, the real Grant Whitaker was sweating. A single bead of perspiration rolled down his temple. He knew what was coming. On the screen, Whitaker did not wait. He yanked the door handle. It was locked. Open the damn door, Whitaker shouted. Officer, I am complying. Please step back, Vale said. I smell narcotics. Get out of the car. The courtroom gasped. The window had been down for seconds. There was no hesitation, no chemical odor discussion before the escalation. Then came the violence. The video showed Whitaker drawing his baton. He smashed the driver's side window. Glass shattered outward and inward. He unlocked the door, ripped it open, and grabbed Vale by the lapels of his suit. "Get your ass out here!" Whitaker hauled Vale onto the wet pavement. Vale did not swing. He did not fight. He immediately went to his knees, hands interlocked behind his head. It was textbook compliance. "Stop resisting!" Whitaker screamed to an empty street, playing to an audience that was not there, trying to create an audio record for a fight that was not happening. He drove a knee into Vale's back, pressing his face into the gravel. Then, the moment that sucked the air out of the room, the camera angle was from the roof bar, looking down. It had a perfect view of Whitaker's right hand. As Whitaker pinned Vale with his left hand, his right hand moved to his own utility belt. He dipped 2 fingers into a small pouch near his handcuffs, retrieved a clear plastic baggie, and in one fluid motion flicked it under the open door of the Mercedes. It was sleight of hand, a magic trick, but the camera caught the magician. "Found it," Whitaker yelled on the video. "We got meth. You are done, dirtbag." Vale, face pressed to the ground, spoke clearly. His voice muffled but audible. "Officer, you are making a grave mistake. My name is Quentin Vale. I am an assistant United States attorney for the Southern District. You have just planted evidence on a federal officer." Whitaker on the video laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "Yeah, and I am the king of Siam. Shut up." The screen went black. The lights in the courtroom flickered back on. No one moved. The jury looked horrified. The foreman's mouth was hanging open. Judge Hargrove looked like she had just swallowed a lemon. She slowly turned her head toward Spencer Hale. Hale was staring at his table, his face the color of ash. He realized he had just prosecuted an innocent man. A powerful, innocent man based on the lies of a dirty cop. His career was not just over, it was incinerated. Vale stood at the podium. He looked calm, but his eyes were blazing. "Officer Whitaker," Vale said, his voice slicing through the silence. "Is that you in the video?" Whitaker slumped in the chair. The arrogance was gone. He looked small. It looks like angle tricks. Shadows." "Shadows?" Vale asked, stepping closer. "Did a shadow break my window? Did a shadow pull a bag of methamphetamine out of your belt pouch? Did a shadow tell a federal prosecutor that you were the king of Siam?" I did not know who you were," Whitaker whispered. It was the worst thing he could have said. Vale paused. He let the words hang there. "You did not know who I was," Vale repeated. "And that is the point, is it not? If I were a plumber, or a teacher, or a mechanic, that baggie would have sent me to prison for a long time. You did not care about the truth. You cared about a stat. You cared about a seizure." "Objection!" Hale squeaked purely out of reflex. He did not even have a legal basis. "Grounds," Judge Hargrove snapped at Hale. "I withdraw," Hale mumbled, sinking lower in his chair. Vale turned back to Whitaker. "Let us talk about that baggie, officer. That is a felony quantity." "Where did you get it?" "I found it in your car," Whitaker insisted, though his voice shook. "We just saw you take it from your belt, so I ask you again, under penalty of perjury. Where did you get it?" Whitaker clamped his mouth shut. He looked at his union rep in the back of the room, who was furiously shaking his head. "No." "Pleading the fifth?" Vale asked. "In front of a jury. Brave." Vale walked back to his table and picked up a thick binder. He dropped it on the table with a loud thud. "Your Honor, the defense has one more line of questioning regarding the witness's credibility. It pertains to his previous employment in the narcotics division." Judge Hargrove nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Vale, but make it quick. I think the jury has seen enough to form an opinion." "Oh, this is not for the jury, Your Honor," Vale said, buttoning his jacket. "This is for the record." The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted from a legal proceeding to a public execution. Whitaker was not just a witness anymore. He was the accused, and the man questioning him was not a defendant. He was the executioner. "Officer Whitaker," Vale began, flipping open the binder. "In previous cases, you were the lead officer on matters involving broken taillights, resisting arrest, and the exact same quantity of methamphetamine. Does that sound familiar?" Whitaker stayed silent. "It is a remarkable coincidence, officer. Everyone you stop for a broken taillight seems to carry the exact same amount of drugs. It is almost as if it is the same bag." The jury began to whisper. Hale buried his face in his hands. Now, Vale continued, Mr. Hale here did not know about this pattern. Why? Because you never logged the drugs into the main evidence locker immediately. You kept them in your personal lockbox for processing, sometimes for days. Is that correct? It is standard procedure when the lab is backed up. Whitaker lied. No, it is not, Vale said sharply. It is a violation of department policy. But let us move past policy. Let us talk about why I was on that road that night. Vale turned to the gallery. The double doors at the back of the courtroom opened. A tall, gray-haired man in a dark suit walked in, flanked by 2 U.S. Marshals. The room murmured. The lawyers knew who he was. Victor Kane, the United States Attorney, the top federal law enforcement official in the region. He did not walk into traffic court cases ever. Kane walked past the bar and took a seat directly behind Vale. He did not say a word. He just stared at Officer Grant Whitaker. Officer Whitaker, Vale said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. You claimed I was just a driver. You claimed you did not know me. That is true. You did not know that for some time the Department of Justice has been running a clandestine operation titled Operation Blue Stain. Whitaker's eyes went wide. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. We were not investigating drug dealers, officer, Vale said. We were investigating a ring of corrupt officers in the precinct who were shaking down motorists, planting evidence, and seizing cash and cars for personal gain. We knew the who. We just needed the how. Vale leaned in close to the microphone. I was not stopped by accident, Grant. I was trolling. I drove a luxury car through your sector at night with a fuse pulled on my taillight. I was fishing, and you took the bait. The courtroom exploded. Reporters in the back row were frantically typing on their phones. The jurors were looking at each other in shock. This was not a defense. It was a sting operation. That night, Vale continued, his voice rising over the noise, you did not arrest a suspect. You arrested the lead prosecutor of the task force assigned to take you down. This is entrapment, Whitaker yelled, standing up. You set me up. Entrapment, Vale said calmly, requires me to coerce you into committing a crime you would not otherwise commit. Did I force you to plant that baggie? Did I force you to lie in your report? Did I force you to perjure yourself in this chair minutes ago? Whitaker looked around wildly. He looked at the judge, at Hale, at the U.S. Marshals standing by the door. There was no exit. Your Honor, Vale turned to Judge Hargrove. The defense rests, and acting in my capacity as Assistant United States Attorney, I am placing Officer Grant Whitaker under federal arrest for deprivation of civil rights under color of law, perjury, and distribution of a controlled substance. Judge Hargrove banged her gavel, but not to silence the room. Mr. Hale, the judge said, her voice icy, I assume the state moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Vale. Hale stood up, his legs shaking. Yes, Your Honor. The state moves to dismiss with prejudice immediately. Charges dismissed, Judge Hargrove said. Officer Whitaker, you are remanded into the custody of the U.S. Marshals. Get him out of my courtroom. As the marshals moved in, cuffing Whitaker's hands behind his back, real cuffs this time, not the ones he used on victims, Whitaker looked at Vale. You ruined my life, Whitaker spat. Vale began packing his briefcase. He did not even look up. No, Grant, you ruined your own. I just turned on the lights. The dismissal of the case was instant, but the fallout was just beginning. The video of the courtroom confrontation leaked within the hour. By the time Quentin Vale walked out of the courthouse steps, news vans were already blocking the street, but Vale did not stop for interviews. He walked straight to the waiting black SUV where Victor Kane was waiting. Hell of a show, Quentin, Kane said as Vale climbed in. It was not a show, Victor. It was necessary, Vale replied, loosening his tie for the first time that day. He looked tired. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the cold reality of what had happened. We got the warrant, Kane said, handing Vale a tablet. Based on Whitaker's testimony and the video, a federal judge signed off on a raid of the precinct lockers. We are hitting them tonight. Vale looked out the window as the city passed by. Whitaker was not working alone. The way Hale tried to bury the discovery, the way the evidence log was forged, the rot goes deeper. Hale is already suspended. Kane noted. The state bar is opening an inquiry. He will be disbarred soon. But the captain, Captain Elias Harlan, that is the big fish. Harlan protects his own. Vale said, Whitaker will not flip on him. Whitaker is scared of Harlan more than he is scared of prison. Then we need to make him more scared of prison, Kane said. Your lead on the interrogation? No. Vale shook his head. I was the victim. Conflict of interest. It will not stick if I am the one squeezing him. Technically, yes. Kane smiled slightly. But Whitaker does not know that. As far as he knows, you are the Grim Reaper. We are going to let you talk to him off the record just to clarify his options. The SUV turned toward the Federal Detention Center. Inside the holding cell, Grant Whitaker sat on a metal bench. The orange jumpsuit scratched his skin. He was stripped of his badge, his gun, his dignity. He kept replaying the moment in the courtroom. The King of Siam line. How stupid could he have been? The heavy steel door buzzed and swung open. Whitaker looked up, expecting a lawyer. Instead, Quentin Vale walked in. He was not wearing the suit jacket anymore, just a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, revealing thick forearms. He carried 2 cups of coffee. He kicked the chair around and sat backward, facing Whitaker. He set 1 coffee on the table. Black, 2 sugars. That is how you like it, right? I read your file. Whitaker stared at the coffee. What do you want? Here to gloat. I do not gloat, Grant. I prosecute. Vale took a sip of his own coffee. You are looking at a substantial term. Civil rights violations carry heavy weight, and since you carried a firearm during the commission of a felony, add more. You will be an old man when you get out, if you survive. Cops do not do well in general population. Whitaker swallowed hard. I will go to protective custody. Maybe, Vale shrugged. Or maybe the feds put you in a facility where we cannot guarantee your safety unless you have value. I am not a snitch, Whitaker muttered. Everyone is a snitch, Grant. It is just a matter of price. Vale leaned in. We know about the blue wall. We know Captain Elias Harlan takes a cut of all seizures. We know Hale suppresses the complaints. You cannot prove Harlan is involved. Not yet, Vale admitted. But we found the baggies in your locker. We found the cash. We have the video. You are going down, Grant. The ship is sinking. The only question is, do you want to be the guy who drowns or the guy who grabs the life raft? Whitaker looked at the coffee. His hands were shaking. If I talk, Whitaker whispered, Harlan will kill me. Harlan is a bureaucrat with a badge, Vale scoffed. He is not the cartel. And once we have him, he will be in a cell right next to you. But if you give him to us, we can move you. Witness protection, a nice quiet life. No badge, but no shank in the shower either. Vale stood up and checked his watch. I have a press conference soon. By the time I walk out that door, the offer expires. Hale is already calling my office trying to cut a deal. If he gives us Harlan first, you get nothing. This was a bluff. Hale had not called, but Whitaker did not know that. The prisoner's dilemma was a beautiful thing. Whitaker looked at the door, then at Vale. The silence stretched for an agonizing minute. It was not just cash, Whitaker said softly. Vale stopped, his hand on the door handle. He did not turn around. Go on. It was not just cash and drugs, Whitaker said, his voice trembling. Harlan, he was taking guns too. Drop guns, untraceable pieces. He was selling them back to the gangs. Vale turned around slowly. This was bigger than corruption. This was arms trafficking. Tell me everything, Vale said, pulling a recorder from his pocket. Start from the beginning. The confession from Grant Whitaker was a roadmap to the heart of the corruption, but a roadmap is useless if you do not drive the car. Whitaker had revealed that Captain Elias Harlan was not just skimming. He was liquidating the precinct's evidence locker. The drop guns, untraceable firearms seized from crime scenes and never logged, were being sold in bulk. And that night, according to Whitaker, was the clearance sale. The location, the city impound lot. A sprawling graveyard of rusted sedans and crushed trucks on the industrial waterfront. It was late. Rain was falling in sheets, turning the dirt lot into a slurry of oil and mud. Quentin Vale sat in the passenger seat of an unmarked tactical van. He had traded his Navy suit for a Kevlar vest with federal prosecutor stenciled on the back in yellow, though he carried a sidearm on his hip. Beside him was Special Agent Reynolds of the FBI. "Thermal is picking up heat signatures in the main garage," Reynolds whispered, tapping the monitor. "6 tangos, 2 vehicles. One looks like a patrol cruiser. The other is a civilian truck." "That is Harlan," Vale said, his eyes fixed on the metal siding of the warehouse. "He uses his cruiser to move the product. Who suspects a police car?" "We have the perimeter sealed," Reynolds said. "On your green light." Vale took a breath. This was the moment. The law was about to collide with the lawless. "Execute," Vale said. The night exploded. Floodlights from 3 armored vehicles snapped on simultaneously, bathing the impound lot in blinding white light. Sirens wailed, a chaotic symphony designed to disorient. "Federal agents, drop your weapons on the ground, now! Now!" The amplified voice boomed over the rain. Inside the warehouse, panic erupted. The garage door began to close, but an armored ram on the front of the lead FBI vehicle smashed through it like it was made of paper. Vale jumped out of the van, moving behind the tactical team. He entered the warehouse, his weapon drawn, but pointed low. The scene was chaos. Several men in hoodies, members of the buyer gang, were already on the ground, zip-tied. But near the back, behind a stack of crates, a man in a police captain's uniform was holding a shotgun. It was Captain Elias Harlan. "Harlan, drop it!" Agent Reynolds screamed, training his rifle on the captain. Harlan looked wild-eyed. He was cornered. He was a man who had spent many years being the predator, and he could not process being the prey. "You do not have jurisdiction here," Harlan shouted, his voice cracking. "This is a sanctioned undercover operation. I am the captain of the precinct." "Not anymore, Elias," a voice called out from the shadows. The FBI agents parted. Quentin Vale stepped forward, walking calmly into the center of the kill zone. He holstered his weapon, showing he was unafraid. Harlan squinted against the glare of the tactical lights. "Vale, the lawyer, you orchestrated this." "When you decided that your badge was a license to steal," Vale said, his voice echoing in the vast metal shed. "When you decided to sell death back to the streets, you swore to protect." "I run this city," Harlan spat. "You think a few feds scare me? I have judges in my pocket. I have the mayor on speed dial." Vale reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it up. "This is a federal indictment, Elias, signed recently. Racketeering, arms trafficking, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, and multiple counts of civil rights violations. Your judges cannot help you. The mayor cannot save you. You are now the property of the United States government." Harlan's grip on the shotgun faltered. He looked at the laser sights dancing on his chest. He looked at Vale's stone-cold face. He realized the game was over. Slowly, the shotgun clattered to the concrete floor. "Get him," Reynolds ordered. As the agent swarmed Harlan, slamming him face first onto the hood of his own patrol car, Vale walked up to him. He leaned down close to Harlan's ear. "Officer Whitaker sends his regards," Vale whispered. Harlan let out a roar of frustration as the cuffs clicked shut. The sound of steel on steel was the sweetest music Vale had heard in a long time. Sometime later, the seasons had changed outside the massive stone walls of the federal courthouse. It was fitting. Inside courtroom 1, the atmosphere was just as cold, just as unforgiving. This was not the traffic court where Officer Whitaker had tried to frame a driver. This was the United States District Court, a place where the air was thin. The wood paneling was dark, and the seal of the United States hung like a heavy iron shield behind the bench. The gallery was packed to capacity. It was not just reporters and legal junkies today. The front rows were filled with a different kind of crowd. Men and women in worn clothes, some weeping, some holding hands. These were the ghosts of the precinct, the victims of the blue wall, people who had lost jobs, custody of children, and years of their lives because Whitaker needed a stat and Captain Harlan needed a bonus. They were there to watch the monsters fall. Quentin Vale sat in the front row directly behind the prosecution table. He was not trying the case. He was a witness and a victim, but his presence dominated the room. He wore a charcoal suit darker than before and sat with the stillness of a statue. Beside him sat Victor Kane, the U.S. attorney. "They look smaller without the uniforms," Kane whispered, leaning in. Vale nodded slowly. "They always do." At the defense table sat 3 men who had once walked the streets like gods. Now they were dressed in standard-issue federal orange jumpsuits, their wrists shackled to waist chains, their ankles bound in steel. Spencer Hale, the once arrogant assistant district attorney, looked like a child who had been aged years in a short time. His hair was thinning, his skin pasty. He would not make eye contact with anyone. Grant Whitaker, the muscle, the enforcer, was slumped over. He had lost weight. The swagger was gone, replaced by a twitchy, nervous energy. He kept glancing at the door leading to the holding cells, as if expecting a shank to come flying out of the shadows. And Captain Elias Harlan. Even in chains, Harlan tried to hold his chin up. He glared at the judge, glared at the jury box, which was empty now as this was sentencing, and glared specifically at Quentin Vale. He still believed in some twisted corner of his mind that he was the hero of this story. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, his voice booming off the walls. The Honorable Judge Anthony Vargo entered. Vargo was a legend in the federal circuit, a man known as the Hammer. He did not tolerate corruption. He viewed a dirty cop as infinitely worse than a street criminal because the cop broke a sacred oath. He sat down, adjusted his robes, and peered over his spectacles at the 3 men. "Be seated," Vargo said. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a lung. "We are here for the sentencing in the matter of United States versus Harlan, Whitaker, and Hale," Judge Vargo began. "The defendants have been found guilty on all counts, including racketeering, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, deprivation of rights under color of law, and obstruction of justice. I have reviewed the pre-sentencing reports. I have heard the victim impact statements, and frankly, in my many years on the bench, I have never seen a betrayal of public trust quite this systemic." He turned his gaze first to Spencer Hale. "Mr. Hale, please stand." Hale stood up on shaky legs, his chains rattled, a lonely, pathetic sound. "Mr. Hale," Judge Vargo said, his voice deceptively soft, "you were an officer of the court. You took an oath to uphold the Constitution. When Officer Whitaker brought you cases that smelled of rot, you did not investigate. You did not question. You buried the complaints. You suborned perjury. You prioritized your conviction rate over human lives." "Your Honor," Hale stammered, his voice cracking. I was young. I was pressured. Captain Harlan made it clear that if I did not play ball, my career was over. I just wanted to do a good job. I did not know the extent." "Stop." Vargo cut him off like a whip crack. "You went to law school. You passed the bar. You knew exactly what was happening. You traded your ethics for a seat at the cool kids' table. You are not a victim, Mr. Hale. You are a parasite." Hale flinched as if he had been slapped. "The state bar has already permanently disbarred you," Vargo continued, looking down at a paper. "But that is not enough. For the count of conspiracy to obstruct justice, I sentence you to a substantial term in federal prison." Hale let out a sob. "Followed by supervised release," Vargo added. "And Mr. Hale, I am recommending that you serve your time in a medium security facility. You wanted to be a tough-on-crime prosecutor. Now you can see what that looks like from the inside. Remand into custody." Hale collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He was ruined. No career, no future, just years of fear. Next was Grant Whitaker. "Mr. Whitaker," Vargo said. Whitaker stood up. He did not look at the judge. He looked at the floor. "You were the instrument of this terror," Vargo said. "You beat men and women. You planted drugs. You stole money. You ruined lives with a smile on your face." "I know," Whitaker whispered. "I am sorry." "Sorry does not give the victims back the years they spent in jail," Vargo snapped, gesturing to the gallery. "Sorry does not give families back what they lost." Whitaker winced. "However," Vargo softened slightly, "the court acknowledges your cooperation. Your testimony was crucial in dismantling the wider network of corruption involving Captain Harlan and the distribution gangs. You broke the blue wall of silence, albeit only after you were caught." Whitaker nodded. He was banking on this. He was praying for a miracle. "The guidelines suggest a substantial sentence," Vargo said. Whitaker stopped breathing. "But due to your motion for substantial assistance, I am departing downward." Whitaker exhaled. "I sentence you to a significant term in federal prison." Whitaker's knees buckled. He would go in a man in his prime. he would come out broken and alone. And Mr. Whitaker, Vargo leaned forward, I am well aware of the dangers a former officer faces in prison. You requested a specific protective custody unit. I am granting that request, but do not mistake this for mercy. You will spend many hours a day in a cell to keep you safe. You built a cage for others, and now you will live in one of your own making. Whitaker nodded numbly. Sin. It was better than death, but only barely. Finally, the room turned its attention to the center of the storm. Elias Harlan, Judge Vargo said. The name sounded like a curse. Captain Harlan stood up. He did not rattle his chains. He stood tall, pulling his shoulders back, his eyes burning with a defiance that bordered on insanity. Do you have anything to say before I pass sentence? Vargo asked. Harlan looked around the room, sneering at the victims in the gallery and finally locking eyes with Quentin Vale. I kept this city safe, Harlan spat, his voice raspy but loud. You people sit in your ivory towers with your law degrees, judging the men who wade through the filth. I did what had to be done. I took guns off the street. You sold them back to the street, Vale shouted from the gallery, breaking protocol. Order! Vargo banged his gavel, though he did not look angry at Vale. He looked back at Harlan. I controlled the chaos, Harlan yelled, his face turning red. I managed the gangs. Without me, this city burns. You think you are winning? You are just opening the gates for the wolves. I am a hero. You are a drug dealer, Judge Vargo said. His voice was not loud, but it silenced Harlan instantly. You are a common criminal wearing a costume, Vargo continued, taking off his glasses and setting them down slowly. You ran a racketeering enterprise from a police station. You ordered your officers to terrorize citizens so you could line your pockets. You did not manage the chaos, Mr. Harlan. You profited from it. Harlan opened his mouth to speak, but Vargo raised a hand. The evidence showed that the weapons you sold, the drop guns you put back on the street, were used in homicides. The blood of those people is on your hands, just as surely as if you pulled the trigger. The courtroom was deadly silent. Elias Harlan, for the crimes of racketeering, arms trafficking, and deprivation of rights resulting in death. The guidelines offer only one appropriate remedy. Vargo looked Harlan dead in the eye. I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The gallery erupted. A collective gasp was followed by the sound of weeping, tears of relief. A woman in the second row, whose son had been framed by Whitaker, cried out, "Thank you!" Harlan froze. The arrogance evaporated. For the first time, the reality hit him. He was not going to a white-collar resort. He was not coming back on appeal. He was going to die in a concrete box. Furthermore, Vargo added, raising his voice over the noise, I am ordering the forfeiture of all your assets. Your pension is revoked. Your properties are seized to pay restitution to the victims. You enter prison with nothing, sir. You leave this world with nothing. You cannot do this, Harlan screamed, lunging forward against the table. The U.S. Marshals were on him instantly, grabbing his arms. I am the captain. I am the law. Take them away, Vargo ordered, banging the gavel with a finality that echoed like a gunshot. As the marshals dragged Harlan out, kicking and screaming like a petulant child, Vale watched. He watched the man who thought he was a king be reduced to a number. He watched Whitaker shuffle out, head down, weeping. He watched Hale stare blankly at the ceiling. It was over. The infection had been cut out. The courtroom began to clear. The victims in the gallery were hugging each other, hugging the prosecutors. It was a scene of pure catharsis. Vale stood up and buttoned his jacket. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Victor Kane. You okay? Kane asked. Yeah, Vale said, letting out a breath he felt like he had been holding for some time. I am okay. You know, Kane said, gesturing to the empty defense table. Most people would have just paid the ticket or taken the plea deal. That is what they counted on. Vale said they counted on fear. They forgot that fear only works if you do not know your rights and if you do not have the power to fight back. Well, Kane smiled. You certainly reminded them. Vale walked out of the courtroom, down the marble hallway, and out the heavy brass doors of the courthouse. The air outside was biting cold, but it felt clean. The media circus was waiting at the bottom of the steps. Cameras flashed. Microphones were thrust in his direction. Mr. Vale is justice served. What do you say to the families? Are you planning to run for district attorney? Vale paused on the top step. He looked at the sea of reporters. He thought about giving a speech. He thought about talking about systemic reform, about the need for vigilance. But he realized the verdict had spoken louder than he ever could. He simply nodded to the press, put on his sunglasses despite the overcast sky, and walked down the steps. He reached his car, the same sleek black Mercedes S-Class. It was parked in a reserved spot now. He opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. The smell of expensive leather greeted him. It was a sanctuary. He started the engine. The digital dashboard lit up. System check okay. Taillights okay. Tires okay. He reached into the center console, the same place Whitaker had claimed he was reaching for a weapon, and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. It was the original citation Whitaker had written him that night. Vale looked at it one last time. He ripped it in half, then in half again. He dropped the pieces into the cup holder. He put the car in drive and pulled out into the city traffic. The streets were busy. People were driving home to their families, unaware of the war that had just ended in the courthouse behind him. And that was how it should be. The job of the law was not to be the star of the show. It was to keep the road clear so people could live their lives. Vale merged onto the highway, the city skyline reflecting in his rearview mirror. He checked his speedometer. Perfectly legal. He was just a driver again, but this time he knew. And the city knew that if you came for him, you had better come correct. Because Quentin Vale did not just know the law. He was the storm that followed the calm. The story of Quentin Vale and Grant Whitaker is a fictional drama, yet it echoes a terrifying reality that plays out in courtrooms across the nation. It reminds us that power without accountability is tyranny, and that sometimes the only thing standing between an innocent person and a ruined life is the truth and the means to prove it. Vale was fortunate. He had the badge, the knowledge, and the resources to fight back. But how many others do not? This story is not just about a gotcha moment. It is about the fragility of justice and the importance of integrity. The karma that hit Whitaker and Harlan was satisfying, but the real victory was the exposure of the system that protected them. What did you think of Quentin Vale's strategy? Did Officer Whitaker deserve a harsher sentence, or was the term enough for turning on his boss? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories of heavy-hitting karma, courtroom drama, and justice served cold, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and remember, the truth always leaves a mark.